The first thing Harlan Briggs noticed was the boy's boots, caked in red clay, moving fast, cutting across the edge of his property at dawn before anyone else had touched their coffee. 12-year-old Cody Marsh had his arms stretched wide around something too big for one person to carry, an old implement wheel, rusted orange and half buried since the 1980s. He was dragging it toward the bed of his grandmother's pickup like it was made of solid gold. Harlan leaned on his fence post and squinted. "Boy, what in the devil are you going to do with that?" Cody looked up, red-faced and breathing hard. "My grandma needs it," he said. Then he loaded the wheel, slapped the tailgate shut, and drove off. Within 2 days, people in Clover Fork, Tennessee were talking. If you've ever been the person in the room that nobody took seriously, this story is for you. Subscribe and stick with us, because we tell stories about the ones who prove everyone wrong. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Clover Fork sits in a basin between two ridgelines in eastern Tennessee. It's the kind of place where families measure time in harvests, not years. Where the same fields that fed your grandfather's grandfather still feed your children, if you're lucky enough and stubborn enough to hold on to them. Machinery is sacred here, not because it's glamorous, because it's survival. When a tractor breaks down at 4 a.m. in June and the hay has to come in before the rain does, every piece of iron matters. The good stuff gets maintained. The broken stuff gets parked and forgotten behind the barn, slowly rusting into the hillside. And rusted tractor wheels, that's as worthless as it gets in Clover Fork. Dead weight, scrap metal, the kind of junk you drag to the edge of the property line and let blackberries grow over. So when Cody Marsh started collecting them, asking neighbors, checking roadsides, showing up at estate sales with his grandmother's pickup, people didn't just think it was odd, they thought it was embarrassing. "That Marsh boy's gone soft in the head," somebody said at the feed store. A few people laughed. Most of them agreed. Cody wasn't what you'd call a talker. He was the kid in the back of the classroom who finished his work early and spent the rest of the period staring out the window, not daydreaming, but watching. The combine working the far field, the way water moved down a hillside after rain, the angle of the furrows. His mother, Diane Marsh, had left Clover Fork when Cody was 4. His father, Ray, worked long-haul trucking, home Sundays, gone by Monday, which meant Cody was raised, mostly, by his grandmother, Loretta Marsh, who owned 43 rocky acres on the south end of the county and had worked them with her husband Eldon for 40 years, until he passed. Now she worked them alone, and the land was slowly winning. Loretta was 71, and the land was getting the better of her. The slope of her property made irrigation a constant battle. Water pooled in the lower field until it drowned the crops. The upper field dried out before the plants could root. She'd been managing it with electric pumps for years, but the electricity bills were eating her margins alive, and one bad harvest away from losing the whole operation. Loretta had sketched out an idea years ago, something she'd read about in an old agricultural extension pamphlet her husband kept in the barn. A gravity-fed water wheel, rigged to the creek on the back of the property. She'd never had the time or the parts, but she'd never thrown the pamphlet away either. One evening in January, she spread it on the kitchen table in front of Cody. "Think we could build that?" she asked. Cody studied it for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "But we're gonna need wheels." Cody saw the problem clearly. He measured it. He sketched refinements on the back of his school notebooks with a mechanical pencil, over and over, improving on what Loretta had started. He had his part of the plan, and nobody asked him what it was. By the end of April, Cody had 14 wheels. They were stacked along the side of Loretta's equipment shed, different sizes, different tread patterns, all oxidized and corroded. His classmates rode the bus past the farm and made jokes. His teacher, Mr. Dalton, pulled him aside one afternoon and asked, gently, if everything was okay at home. Cody said yes, sir, and went back to his drawings. What nobody had seen yet were the other components. What nobody had seen was Loretta, rising before dawn 3 days a week to work in the shed. She'd learned to weld beside Eldon decades ago, field repairs, fence brackets, whatever the farm needed. That knowledge hadn't left her. She was the one laying the frame. Cody was the one refining the design. Weston Plumley, a semi-retired mechanic who ran a parts shop on Route 11, noticed Cody coming in regularly. Not buying, asking. About axle tolerances. About bearing loads. About how water pressure could translate through a shaft without losing torque. "You building something?" Weston finally asked. Cody set a hand-drawn schematic on the counter. Weston studied it, turned it sideways, studied it again. "Where'd you learn to draw this?" "My grandma drew the first version," Cody said. "I just made it better." Weston didn't say anything for a long moment. "Come back Saturday," he finally said, "and bring the rest of your drawings." That night, Weston called Harlan Briggs, the same farmer who'd watched Cody haul that first wheel at sunrise. "I don't know what that boy is building," Weston said, "but I think you ought to drive over there and look at his shed." Harlan drove over on a Tuesday. What he found in that shed made him stand still for a full minute without speaking. Loretta was at the welding bench, mask up, running a bead along the central shaft. Cody stood beside her, holding the schematic. Together, they had built a frame, welded together from salvaged iron stock, and were in the process of mounting the tractor wheels along a central shaft in a precise arrangement. The wheels weren't random. They were sized and positioned to catch water flow and convert it into rotational energy. A water wheel, not a museum piece, a functioning, field-grade water-powered pump system designed to move irrigation water from the low field up to the dry upper pasture, using nothing but the creek that ran along the back of Loretta's property. No electricity required. Harlan turned to Loretta. "How long have you been at this?" "Since January," she said. "Cody's been hauling parts. I've been putting them together." "Who helped you?" She shook her head. "Nobody." Harlan looked between them, the old woman at the welder, and the boy with the schematic. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you might have just solved your water problem." Loretta pulled her mask down. "That's the plan." 2 days later, the frame collapsed. A weld on the central shaft failed under a stress test, and the whole mechanism buckled sideways into the mud. Loretta stood over it without moving for a long time. Cody watched from beside her. Neither of them said anything. That night, she put her hand on his shoulder at the dinner table. "We've got time," she said. "The rain doesn't come until June." She was back in the shed by 6 the next morning. Cody was right behind her. This time, Weston Plumley was with them. Over the next 3 weeks, word spread, the way things do in small communities where people pretend not to pay attention, but always do. Sheriff's Deputy Tamara Goss drove past the farm every morning and started slowing down near the shed. Donnie Fitch, who farmed the next property over and had complained about his own irrigation costs for 15 years, started making excuses to stop by. Even Mr. Dalton came out on a weekend to see what his quiet student had been sketching instead of doing his algebra. The rebuild was quieter, more deliberate. Weston had shown Loretta and Cody how to test the welds before loading them, how to account for variance in water volume across seasons, how to install a bypass valve so the system wouldn't flood in a heavy rain. On the morning of May 29th, Cody carried a bucket of creek water to the top of the system, poured it slowly over the first wheel, and stepped back. The wheels turned, slowly at first, then with a rhythm, as the creek current caught and the mechanism engaged. Water climbed the lift pipe. It traveled 53 vertical feet, and it came out the other end at the top of Loretta's upper field, steady and clean. Loretta didn't move for a moment. Then she took off her work gloves, folded them once, and pressed them against her mouth. Harlan Briggs, who had driven over without being invited, took off his hat. Nobody laughed. Within a week, 3 neighboring farms had asked Loretta and Cody to come look at their water problems. Within a month, the county extension agent, Dr. Patricia Holloway, had driven out from Knoxville with a colleague from the University of Tennessee's Agricultural Engineering Department. They photographed the system, measured its output, and asked Loretta and Cody detailed questions for 2.5 hours. What they had reinvented, without knowing it, was a refined variation of a gravity-fed overshot water wheel, a technology that had powered American farms for over 200 years before electricity made it obsolete. The difference was the application. using salvaged tractor wheels as the wheel paddles and engineering the system around modern PVC distribution lines rather than wooden troughs. "The old ways don't disappear," Dr. Holloway said, standing at the top of Loretta's upper field, watching water flow into the furrows. "Sometimes they just wait for someone to remember them." The university would later name the design the Marsh Configuration in a regional sustainability paper. Cody was 12 years old. Loretta was 71. Between them, they had built something neither could have built alone. Harlan Briggs would tell the story for the rest of his life. Not the part about the wheels, not even the part about the water. He always told the part about the boots in the clay at dawn, the boy moving fast, arms stretched wide, hauling something nobody else could see value in. And about the old woman in the shed, mask down, welder running, building something nobody thought to ask her about. Loretta Marsh reduced her electric bill by 60% that first summer. The upper field produced a yield she hadn't seen in 20 years. She didn't sell a single acre. Loretta kept the original frame, the one that had buckled and fallen, in the corner of the shed, a reminder. He never explained why he'd started asking for the wheels. When a reporter from the county paper finally asked him directly, he just shrugged. "My grandma had a plan," he said. "She just needed the parts." The reporter turned to Loretta. "And why tractor wheels?" Loretta thought about it. "Everybody said they were worthless," she said. "But they were still round, and round things turn." As George Washington Carver once observed, "When you can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." Nobody in Clover Fork was laughing anymore. These are the stories farming communities carry quietly, the ones that never make the news but change lives anyway. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because there are more where this came from.